One of the most captivating aspects of Netflix's adaptation of Neil Gaiman's The Sandman is its ability to make its characters feel memorable. One such character is Hob Gadling, who appears in the second half of the powerful 6th episode, The Sound of Her Wings. The episode finds Dream trying to figure out his place in the world after escaping his imprisonment and going on a journey to reclaim his magical items. After spending the day with his sister Death, Dream makes his way to a pub he has been going to for centuries to meet an old friend, Hob Gadling. The episode is rich in thematic elements, and Hob plays a crucial role in depicting what it means to truly live and how the certainty of death does not need to be looked at as a shadow that clouds one's life. Hob Gadling is introduced into the story in 1389, the late Middle Ages, in an English tavern. Morpheus and his sister Death just happen to be in the tavern. Death has decided Morpheus needs to get out more and get to know humans while they're awake. Hob's conversation with his friends captures their attention. Hob is telling his drinking mates that death is something he can avoid because it is more like a habit that overtakes people as opposed to a real occurrence. Hob says he knows all about death, that he watched half his village succumb to the plague and fought with Buckingham in Burgundy, and he has decided that death is not for him. The only reason people die is because everyone does it, he declares. It's rubbish, death. It's stupid. I don't want nothing to do with it. Upon hearing this, Dream decides to conduct an experiment, and with the help of his sister Death, grants Hob eternal life, with the only caveat being he needs to meet him in the same pub every 100 years for a drink and conversation. And thus begins Hob's extraordinarily long life. Dream does this believing that the difficulties of life will be too much for Hob to handle, and he will eventually beg Dream to take back his gift. However, as the centuries pass and the two meet in the same bar every 100 years, Hob continues to tell Dream that he's not ready to die and how he has too much to live for, surprising the king of the dreaming every single time. Other immortals exist in the Sandman universe, but Hob is the one Gaiman spends the most time with. Because Hob's lifespan is so long, he comes to exemplify and embody several issues with memory and history. He's a touchpoint for personal and collective memory, demonstrating how a life becomes history and history becomes merely story. At the same time, Hob himself is a story, a character made up by Neil Gaiman. Part of Gaiman's purpose with Hob's storyline is to explore life, and it's also part of the whole "the more things change, the more they stay the same" story arc. Part of Gaiman's point is that humans are humans. Our worries, our fears, our desires don't really change over time, even when time is measured in centuries rather than decades. Hob's story begins in a time of uncertainty and societal upheaval. Gaiman establishes this through ambient conversation among the people in the tavern. Speech bubbles, not attributed to any specific character, line the edges of the first panel. The first two complain about poll taxes and invoke leaders of the 1381 Peasants' Revolt. The next complains about English food, penny ale and cold bacon, and expresses a preference for French wine and hot meat. A fourth lists the trials and tribulations of the time, war, plague, and 2 bloody popes fighting like weasels in heat. The 100 Years' War was in full swing at this point. Hob's claim to have fought with Buckingham at Burgundy would have put him in Brittany around 1380. The Black Death was particularly rampant in England from about 1348 to 1350, and the popes referred to when Rome elected Pope Urban VI and the French declared Clement VII as Pope instead. The speaker takes all of this as indication that the end of the world is coming. Finally, there's a complaint about crime, specifically banditry, and that the king, Richard II, needs to step in and put a stop to it. Despite all this and his personal experience with plague and war, Hob is in no hurry to die. When Morpheus approaches him with his offer to meet again in 100 years to see what it's like for a man to not die, Hob immediately agrees to meet him in 1489 over the laughter of his friends. The rest of the comic issue covers the next 600 years and 6 meetings from 1489 to 1989. Hob notes what sorts of things have changed over each century and updates Morpheus on what he's been doing. His fortunes rise and fall, he makes money in printing and shipping, buys a knighthood, then loses everything, he bounces back by investing in shipping again, this time at the height of the Atlantic slave trade. Interestingly, Gaiman doesn't put Hob on the right side of history, as it were. Hob sees the whole thing as a business venture with African slaves as cargo, much like the cotton, tobacco, and sugar that also fill the holds of his ships, not as the atrocity it is. It's Morpheus who suggests that perhaps treating your fellow humans as less than animals is a poor thing and suggests Hob find another line of work. When they meet next time, Hob admits that Morpheus was right and he regrets his part in slavery up to the end of the series. After all, how can a man who has the ultimate freedom take that away from others? Gaiman's theme of the more things change, the more they stay the same is most evident in the ambient conversations which continue throughout the issue. In 1689, people are complaining about fire, flood, plague, and the poor laws that created unemployment benefits. In 1989, the conversations are complaints about Thatcher's poll tax, nearly identical to those in 1389, concerns about the end of the world, complaints about crime rates, plague again, though this time it's HIV and AIDS instead of the Black Death. Fashions in clothing, hair, and speech all change, but Hob, Morpheus, and the concerns of everyday people stay the same. Often popular ideas about the past rest on the belief that people were fundamentally different back then. Gaiman's point here is that people are fundamentally the same, that we've always had the same problems and concerns, and one way that those concerns are presented is through narrative. Throughout the issue, characters use stories to try to make sense of things, to try to fit their lived experience into an understandable pattern. During their second meeting in 1489, Hob asks Morpheus how this has happened. His guesses about who Morpheus is include a wizard, a saint, and a demon, all understandable guesses for someone living in Catholic England. In 1689, Hob tells Morpheus he was almost drowned as a witch because he got careless about where he was living and for how long. The nebulous Day, who tried to drown him, explained his failure to age and die as witchcraft, which was a fairly common accusation between 1560 and 1630. In 1789, Morpheus and Hob's meeting is interrupted by people who have heard stories that the devil and the Wandering Jew meet here once every 100 years and attempt to kidnap them. The Wandering Jew is another old story, dating back to the 13th century, about a Jewish man cursed to live until Christ's second coming. Hob mentions him early on as the only person he can think of who lives forever. This is another example of people fitting Hob and Morpheus into a story they would understand. Over the course of their time together, the two develop a close friendship, although at first Dream refuses to acknowledge that their deal has turned into anything more than a social experiment. During one of their visits, Hob accuses Dream of being lonely, and that their friendship is the true reason Dream keeps returning to the bar for the drink. This statement sends Dream into a rage, not believing that an entity such as himself would need the companionship of anyone, never mind a human. The next time they're supposed to meet, Dream does not show up. He's imprisoned at this time, but this does not deter Hob, who arrives early in the next century and patiently waits for Dream to arrive. In the end, Dream finally arrives and lets Hob know, "I was always told it was bad manners to keep one's friends waiting." Hob Gadling is one of the most significant characters in the Sandman series because he is able to teach Dream about fulfillment and the preciousness of life. For someone like Dream, who has the power to create and destroy at will in the dreaming, this lesson develops his character and gives him insight into his own existence, which makes him a more relatable and sympathetic central figure. In the grand scheme of things, Death likely hoped Dream would make a friend in Hob. While it took Morpheus more than 600 years to come to the realization, Morpheus did confirm that he and Hob are friends after all. But Dream is also not the same Dream who angrily stormed out on Hob when he accused him of being lonely. Morpheus was cut off from the dreaming and spent over a century as a prisoner in isolation. When he returned to his realm, he found the dreaming broken. Yet during his quest to retrieve his stolen symbols of office, Morpheus interacted with humans like Joanna Constantine in ways he hadn't before, and the King of Dreams' feelings on mortals, and one human in particular, began to change. It's a very slow process, but it's happening. Perhaps as Death intended, Dream finally understood that he does need companionship and that Hob has been there all along. Dream's and Hob's friendship ties into the thematic heart of the Sandman. The first episode of the Sandman deal with Dream's need to reaffirm his belief in the good nature of humanity after feeling betrayed and hurt following his imprisonment. When nightmares bring out the worst in humanity and characters like John Dee harness the power of Dream's ruby to fulfill people's desires, Dream constantly tries to reassure himself that it is hope and dreams that keep humanity from falling by the wayside. Hob's desire to live, no matter how difficult life may get, is related to the idea that there's always a part of humanity that will get better, a part that wants hope no matter how bad people can seem. For humankind, the desire to live is directly linked to the hopes and dreams that hold them to the best of their ability. When Death and Dream met earlier in the episode, that reminded him that they have no greater purpose in the universe. Their purpose is to serve humanity, and humanity in turn enables them to continue to inspire. According to Death, their purpose of serving humanity means that they should never be alone in fulfilling their duties. That's why Dream needs to be among people to understand them. Dream's progression is evident over several of his meetings with Hob. It is the godlike Dream who informs Hob on the inhumanity of slavery, while Hob is the one that finds no passion in the plays of another famous contemporary, William Shakespeare. The human is the one who coldly and objectively observes that life is full of pain and suffering, while Dream is the one to have an emotional outburst during one of their meetings. Morpheus became less self-centered as a result of Hob's influence. For once, he forced himself to look at life from another point of view. He was intrigued by seeing that what Hob felt was in so much contrast to what he believed in, and that was by far the most beautiful aspect of their relationship. There was always room for different opinions. Dream realized that it was indeed a privilege to be around mortals, as otherwise he would never have experienced what he did in the company of his friend Hob. Even though Morpheus has made significant progression by announcing his friendship to Hob Gadling, he's nowhere near the supposed end destination of his journey. However, the friendship he formed with Hob was the learning curve Dream had to go through in order to understand the inherent worth of humanity and how to help them be the best they can. It is difficult to consider Dream as anything other than a disgruntled and lonely, but one must remember to think of him as representation or personification of a human condition, namely Dream. If one does that, it becomes clear how truly bizarre it is that this being is in need of human interaction at all. The recurring theme of Morpheus, fostering relationships, not only serves to separate him from the rest of his family, none of whom exhibit the need for companionship, and instigate his introspection, it also makes the reader understand that the heart of our existence as humans is to be found in our relationship with others. This is why Dream's improved relationship, even if it only improved to the point that he realized that he has transgressed in a relationship, are both the product and the effect of his own personal growth and the progression of his journey. What do you think this unlikely friendship between Hob Gadling and Dream represents? I would love to know your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comment section. Thank you, The Waking World, for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like the video to support it, subscribe and turn on the notification bell to be notified of the upcoming videos. This was Heads and Tails. Till next time.